Is red meat bad for you? On the one hand, red meat makes you strong, and it's every American's God-given right to grill a steak on his barbecue during the summer. I believe this came up in a church synod at some point. But on the other hand, the WHO has declared red meat to be a carcinogen, with a hot dog being as bad as a cigarette. Yes, that was the headline when the report came out. So how do we reconcile these opposing ideas? Part of the solution is realizing that the WHO organization in question is based in France. So maybe they're still angry about the freedom fries thing, but actually, examining the nuances of the French language will help us understand what's going on. Now, if you don't speak French, don't worry, I got you covered. C'est pas si difficile du tout, n'inquiétez-vous pas, vous allez voir. Sit back, grab a baguette, and let's find out how dangerous red meat really is. I'm Christopher Labos, and this is Medscape's On Second Thought. Bonjour tout le monde. Now, meat doesn't seem like it should be a complex topic to study, but it is. Many people around the world eat animals, but we don't all eat the same animals. For example, this is a cow, often used to make hamburger and steak. And this is a Toby, God's perfect angel who every year gets a more elaborate birthday party than I do. He is my son, and I would throw myself in front of a moving car for him. So by necessity, when we do medical research on meat, we are lumping together a whole lot of different human behavior with people eating different types of animals prepared in many different types of ways based on, frankly, where they live. There's no real alternative, and you can't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Now, most credible research is at least going to separate out red meat from white meat, but most people don't really know what the difference is. If you thought pork was white meat, you're wrong. You think that because of a marketing slogan. In 1987, the National Pork Board paid for the marketing campaign Pork, the other white meat, basically trying to position themselves as an alternative to chicken. People usually think veal or deer is white meat and think that has something to do with the age of the animal or whether it was free range or the color of the meat, but it doesn't. Chefs and restaurants say all kinds of things, but the real definition is really simple. Mammals are red meat, birds are white meat. Now, there's another thing we need to explain. We have red meat, but we also have processed red meat. Processed red meat is when the meat is transformed in some way, and that doesn't mean cooking. If you just take a piece of steak and cook it on your barbecue or in the oven, that's not processed meat. Processing is doing things like salting the meat or smoking it or curing it. So processed meat is stuff like bacon, sausages, hot dogs, salami, corned beef, smoked meat. So when we talk about this, we are primarily talking about processed red meat. And the people doing the talking are IARC, the International Agency for Research in Cancer, which is a WHO organization whose mandate is to promote international research on cancer, particularly its causes. One of their programs is a monograph program, where they evaluate the evidence for the carcinogenicity of specific exposures. And here's where our knowledge of French is going to come in handy. IARC likes to look at something called the hazard rather than the risk. In fact, every time they have a press conference, they spend about 5 minutes explaining the difference to people, which begs the question, why not just study risk and be done with it? Now in English, those words seem pretty much like synonyms, and the way most people use them, they are, but in French, they are slightly different. Le risque et le hasard don't quite mean the same thing in French, and to be fair, even in English, their definitions are technically slightly different. As those of you who read the dictionary for fun already know. A risk is the probability that something harmful will happen. A hazard is a potential source of harm. So a grenade is a hazardous thing to have on your desk, but the risk of it exploding is quite low unless you pull the pin. So IARC is researching hazard. They are evaluating whether something is associated with cancer, not how risky that something is. They categorize everything into groups. Carcinogenic to humans, probably carcinogenic, possibly carcinogenic, or not classifiable. There is a not carcinogenic group, but there's nothing in there. There's one substance that was in there for a bit, but they removed it. Comment below if you know what that substance is. You might win a prize. You won't. And here's a hint. You find it in yoga pants. So IARC has never found anything that doesn't cause cancer. So when they go hunting for heffalumps and woozles, they find heffalumps and woozles. Now, to be fair, which I am under no contractual obligation to be, they are a WHO agency and they are tasked to review substances that are of interest to world governments. So they are not going to review stuff that is clearly unrelated to cancer, but still. They put a lot of stuff in group 1, the definitely carcinogenic group. Tamoxifen is in group 1. And as most of you know, tamoxifen treats breast cancer. It has saved who knows how many lives. So calling it a carcinogen sounds a bit daft. But it is associated with abnormal uterine bleeding and an increased risk of uterine cancer. And the data is pretty uncontroversial, right? So IARC says, we are certain this association is true, therefore it goes into group 1. But what's the risk of tamoxifen causing uterine cancer? It's 0.3% on the absolute risk scale. So basically 0, and a heck of a lot lower than the breast cancer risk. So very clearly take the drug if you have ER-positive breast cancer. And this is the problem. IARC is saying how certain they are that something is dangerous, not how dangerous that something is. So conclusive data, group 1 carcinogenic. Strong but not conclusive data, group 2A. Probably carcinogenic. Only some evidence and maybe contradictory evidence or maybe just animal studies, group 2B. Possibly carcinogenic. Not much data to work off of, group 3. And their system, generally works okay because they put tobacco, asbestos, and gamma radiation in group 1, which makes sense and is fine. But then they also put stuff like birth control pills and estrogen and tamoxifen in group 1. And sure, there is a small increased risk of breast cancer with birth control pills if you have a family history, but it's a pretty small risk and frankly negligible for the general population and largely outweighed by the decreased ovarian cancer risk that comes with it. But IARC isn't doing that type of nuanced calculation. They say, estrogen causes breast cancer, the pill has estrogen, the link is proven, the pill goes into class 1. So it was IARC that reviewed all the data about processed red meat and declared it a group 1 carcinogen. Fun fact, unprocessed red meat was only put in group 2A because the data was less solid. So for anybody grilling a steak right now, this doesn't apply to you. Now, not everybody agreed with IARC. The NutriRex consortium was a group of researchers who also reviewed the data on red meat and came to a completely different conclusion. Their analysis was motivated by 2 things. 1, the funding they received from the beef industry. This is why we can't have nice things, people. And 2, they dismissed much of the research because it comes from observational cohorts, not randomized controlled trials. In food science, randomized controlled trials are hard because telling people what to eat is often met with, make me. So the NutriRex consortium conclusion was, keep eating meat, the data is uncertain because most of it is observational, which frankly is a bit reductionist to me because we have a lot of observational data saying the same thing, and I have a hard time believing all the stuff added to processed red meat is doing us any favors. But let's take the IARC assessment at face value and accept the observational data. They are convinced by the hazard, or le hasard, mes amis, le hasard. Mais c'est quoi le risque? What is the risk really? The cancer risk is most clear-cut for colon cancer, which is pretty logical. Your lifetime risk of colon cancer is about 4%, assuming you're of general risk with no family history or genetic risk factors. It's actually 4.2% for males and 4.0% for females, according to the 2022 cancer statistics from the American Cancer Society, but let's say 4% for everyone just for simplicity. The IARC report estimated that eating an extra 50 grams of processed red meat per day, every day, increased your risk of colorectal cancer by 18%. Now, take 4% and multiply it by 1.18. You get 4.72%. So let's say 5% if we're rounding up. All this to say, if you eat hot dogs every day of your life, your risk of getting colon cancer goes up by 1 percentage point on the absolute scale. Now, at first blush, you might say, that's nothing, pass the bratwurst. But 1% on the absolute scale is not trivial. That's what, thousands of cases per year, millions of cases over the course of your lifetime in a country of 300 million people? It has some important public health implications. Is the risk high enough for us to stop killing and eating Bambi's mother? Hard to say. It's not negligible, but it's not astronomical either. And there are economic and environmental factors to keep in mind, issues that often get forgotten when we are talking about this in medicine. Now, I will stress one final point though. Whatever your feelings regarding that nectar of the gods we call bacon, the IARC estimates of a 1% increase are about daily consumption of processed meat. And let's be honest, you don't need to eat jerky every day of your life. For Medscape, I'm Dr. Christopher Labos with Toby.